Hey everyone. Yeah, I'm home for a little bit on my 1 hour lunch. Gotta leave at least by, I'd say 11:55, 11:56 to get back there by 12:02. But I wanted to take this time while I've got it to kind of talk about something that Linkara, Louis Lumberg, reviewed a couple weeks ago, and that was the Sonic Super Special number 7. Now, I want to explain something about this. The Sonic Super Special number 7, when you look back at it almost 16 years later, some might look back on it with some nostalgic fondness because it was a one-time deal and it showed the Image characters in a different light. You see, a lot of hardcore comic book fans were used to the Image characters being this darker, grittier, more mature, adult-oriented characters and product that Image had become known for, that to see them in a more toned down, kiddified, all ages manner was really different. And that obviously is one of the reasons that fans, even to this day, some of those die-hard, hardcore comic book fans, and especially Image Comics fans, even to this day, look at it with such disdain. And some do look at it with a mixed reaction, like they understand why it was done the way it was done. But then, like I said, you have those hardcore fans that are like, they basically made these characters into a parody of who they were. And this is BS. And they have a right to feel that way because they look at their characters being treated like a joke, and one can't, like I said, the fans basically felt that these die-hard Image Comics fans basically felt like their characters were being treated like a joke. And that is one of the reasons why, even up to this day, some look at it with nostalgic fondness, but some kind of still look at it with a bit of disdain because they're like, you pretty much treated our characters like a joke, Archie. And they probably still feel that way with Image. They're like, Image, you let Archie treat them like a joke. But I think the one thing, again, as I mentioned earlier, they have to understand that I just talked about is Sonic was always looked at as an all ages comic. So you can't just take characters from a comic book publisher that's known for portraying them in a more mature, adult-oriented way and keep them that way in a crossover like this. Sure, you could try to reference a little bit. Sure, you could probably do a little bit of referencing here and there and try to kind of blend in, just very lightly blend in a bit of that maturity and stuff. So that, Image Comics fans can be like, okay, that's a little bit of the Shadowhawk, or that's a little bit of the Savage Dragon, that's a little bit of the Max, that's a little bit of the Union, or whatever that I know. So I can understand. I can understand how fans feel. If you're a die-hard comic book fan and you're used to seeing the characters in a certain way, and like I said, I can understand and respect that. I can understand because I'm used to seeing certain characters in a certain, shown or showcased in a certain way or seen in a certain way. I'm used to seeing that. But I can understand why they did it why they changed them up a little bit for this crossover. But I think fans also have to look at it this way. Archie Comics could have done the same thing they did with Marvel. When they crossed over Archie and the Punisher together, they did two different comics, I think. One that was produced with Marvel in charge, and the other produced with Archie in charge. Now they could have done the same thing with this crossover, but here's the problem. I think in a sense, since they noticed what Image was doing with the Ninja Turtles, another brand that they used to publish comics about, or used to publish comics for, when they saw what Image was doing with Ninja Turtles, I think in a sense that maybe they were a little afraid that if they did something similar to what, like I said, Archie and Marvel did with that crossover between Archie and the Punisher, that fans would start preferring maybe the Image Comics rendition of the crossover or version of the crossover over the Archie Comics version. And I think that's what they were afraid of. Now, one can perfectly understand that, hey, they don't want to see their characters in that light. One can perfectly understand that. You know, like I said, one can, perfectly understand that. But when you think about it, if you put the shoe on the other foot, if Image was in charge, like I mentioned, if they were in complete control or had the most of the say here, then there is no doubt. Then there is no doubt in my mind whatsoever that, Image would have portrayed their characters, as, a lot of fans know them. But they also would have done the same, if not similar, to the Archie characters. And yeah, like I mentioned earlier, maybe they would keep a little bit of what fans knew of the Archie Sonic comic characters as they're seen in the Archie comics, but also added that bit of maturity. Just like in a sense, even though it was very lightly blended in there, Archie did the same for the Image comic characters. But I don't think it's just that either. You got to look at basically who also wrote the book. Ken Penders. Now, Ken Penders probably never wrote for Shadowhawk, really, or the Savage Dragon, or the Max, or Velocity, or Union, or Spawn, so he probably didn't really know how to write them that well. He probably had to read some books to get an idea of who the characters were, to at least have a better sense of how he was going to portray them in the comic. So, like I said, how he's going to portray them in the crossover in the comic. So even though you don't like Ken Penders in a sense, you do got to give him some slack since he was the main writer, that he had to basically work off what he was reading, work off some references, some research, and try to, like I said, portray the characters in a sense that even though they'd be more toned down and more kiddified for the crossover, more of an all ages kind of deal, but kind of keep some resemblance of, yes, this is still the same Shadowhawk, or this is still the same Savage Dragon, this is still the same Velocity, same Union, same Max and all that you guys at Image Comics, you guys, the fans of these Image Comic characters, know. But above all that, I think we have to realize one other thing. That in reality, this was actually... That's just St. Jude. They always call for some reason. But anyway, like I said, but you gotta look at, but again, like I said, in reality, the real reason for this crossover happening, as I was trying to say before the phone interrupted there, was Ken Penders was using this crossover as like a pilot like a pilot episode for his own publication called The Lost Ones. That's what it was. The Dr. Droid character, the Particle character, the Kira character, all of them were part of the Lost Worlds deal. And that's what this crossover was in reality. Yes, it was a crossover between the Image comic characters and the Archie Sonic characters, but in reality, above all that, it was actually more of a pilot issue for the Lost Ones comic book, which ironically did get publication for one issue by Image Comics. That's all it was. It was nothing more than a shot in the dark by Ken Penders to get his Lost Ones franchise published and showcased to the world. That's all it was. That's all it was. I mean, this is why when some people, like let's say Linkara, reviews this and says, well, the Image comic characters and the Sonic characters were barely around each other that much, barely interacted with each other. And that is true when one looks at it. But when one looks at it from that point of view, it's mainly because, like I said, this was more of a pilot issue or a test issue for the Lost Ones franchise. That's all it was. That's all it was. And you might think to yourself, looking back 16 years later like I am, and you might say, and you might be thinking to yourself now, especially with what's happened over the past year or so, you might be thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute. Ken Penders actually was using a Sonic Super Special to test launch his own properties? And we thought he was trying to, do things with the, Lawless Sue Chronicles. But this? He was doing this way before then? Yep, he was. He was doing this way before then. And when you think about it, looking back at it 16 years later, yeah, the crossover from a nostalgic fondness kind of deal is still okay in its own cheesy sort of way. Its own cheesy, unique kind of way. But it's also different in the fact that in the reality of it all, it's actually nothing more than a test pilot, a test issue for the Lost Ones, an introductory to the Lost Ones. It's kind of like when back in the day, and I think they rarely do it now, but back in the day, back in the 90s and the 80s and even the early 2000s, television shows, whether they were sitcoms or even animated shows, sometimes they would dedicate one episode to being like a pilot episode for a spinoff. Yeah. I remember there was an episode of Married with Children that did this. And then several other animated ones too. I can't think of some, but there have been some that have done this. And comic books are no stranger to it either. So it doesn't surprise me when you look back at it 16 years later and realize that Sonic Super Special number 7 of the original Sonic Super Specials was not just a crossover between Image characters and Sonic characters, but in a sense was nothing more than a pilot/test issue or introductory issue for the Lost Ones franchise by Ken Penders. Because think about it, it's kind of ironic that immediately afterwards almost, he got one issue published by Image Comics, and that was it. So, when one thinks about it, folks, that's exactly what the Sonic Super Special number 7 really was in reality. Yeah, I mean, it was a nice little crossover between the Image comic characters and the Archie Sonic comic characters for its own unique, cheesy kind of fun, but in reality, like I said, it's nothing more. When you all look at it, and you look beyond that, it was nothing more than a test pilot, a test run, and an introductory issue for the Lost Ones franchise by Ken Penders. That's all it was. That's all it was, because, what else could it be? I mean, if it was truly a crossover, it would have been just between the Image characters and the Sonic characters. Why would you need this Particle, this Kira, this Dr. Droid? Why would you need them? You know what I'm saying? So overall, though, it is a unique, looking back on it 16 years later, it does have a nostalgic fondness that people will can enjoy, and for its cheesiness and unique kind of interpretation of these more mature characters that fans are used to reading when they're officially published by Image Comics. So that's all I'm going to say on it. Let me know what you guys think down below. I'm going to eat me some lunch here, and I am out.